All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing our second objective, which is how to remember transit routes. All right. So we'll start with kind of a preface, right? So in order to be able to use the transit system a little bit more independently, it's important to memorize parts of the transit network. Luckily, we'll find that there are some common techniques that we can use to actually memorize some of the patterns that occur, right? This particular slide focuses on patterns in the numbering scheme. But the kind of method by which we can find patterns is usually through the system map, right? The system map is often most helpful because it helps us to visualize the network instead of leaving it as kind of very arbitrary numbers or letters or words, right? But let's kind of dive in, right? So we're first going to be talking about patterns in numbering. So as you may know, right, transit routes have numbers or are assigned letters or something like that. And often we can find some sort of patterns in the route numbers they are assigned. So our first pattern is number to geography. So route numbers, the idea is that route numbers sometimes correspond to certain geographic areas. Maybe a route crosses into kind of a geographic area. Maybe it only circulates in that geographic area. Or even if it just serves a significant amount of stops in that geographic area, even if it goes on to other geographic areas. So if we notice some of those patterns, we might see commonalities in the numbers of their routes. We also have another primary pattern in number to express / non-express routes. So first we need to define what an express route is. An express route connects two distant geographic areas with little to no stopping in between. So think of point A and then point B, and then very little in between, right? Very few stops. That's why this service is called express. And usually it's kind of differentiated from other routes, either by numbering or just by some sort of indication. A popular way to indicate that a route is express is to include the letter X in the route number. For example, 90X or 524X or 1X, right? To differentiate it from a non-express route or non-express version of that route. But these aren't the only patterns, right? There are a number of different patterns that could occur within a transit network. And so we want a kind of broader, more broadly applicable method to find number patterns. And that's simply that we want to first notice the pattern, right? If we're browsing the kind of system map and then we see, oh, there's some sort of commonalities, right? We might want to figure out what is this commonality very concretely, right? What is the rule that defines this commonality? And then we want to verify its applicability, right? If we take our rule, the rule that we have formulated, and we look at other routes, does this rule hold up, right? And then also, do routes that we think fall outside of the rule, does the rule not apply to them? We want to also see that, right? So notice patterns and then verify if those patterns actually exist. Often in numbering, we'll see kind of the leading numbers, right? The kind of the first numbers indicating the pattern, and then the kind of tailing numbers, so kind of the last numbers, indicating or just kind of being arbitrary, right? Kind of just counting routes or kind of being just indicating that they are different routes essentially, right? And so they fall into patterns of XY, XXY, and XYY, right? So X kind kind of indicates the pattern, right? For example, number to geography. And then y is just kind of an arbitrary number that's given, right? Of course, we can have patterns that don't necessarily fall into x, y, x, x, y, x, y, y, but these are just very commonly used within transit systems. And also, we want to mention imperfections, right? Because transit systems are messy, we will often find imperfections or exceptions to any sort of rule we try to make. And it's important to remember that these rules are for the benefit of our memorization. So if it's easier to remember a rule and then could just kind of note down its exceptions, then maybe we'll keep the rule. But if it's just very burdensome to remember all the exceptions, maybe we'll just kind of discard the rule and try to memorize all of those routes manually. Right? Whatever is easiest for you and easiest for your memorization. All right, so let's return to the link transit system map, and we'll try to find some sort of numbering patterns. Of course, the patterns will probably be XY, simply because there are only, like the digits are only one digit or two digits. And we immediately notice a few patterns, and I'll kind of list them. First, we have 1Y routes. So route 11, route 18, which primarily serve East Wenatchee, right? If you see the label, East Wenatchee, those routes primarily run in East Wenatchee without doing much service, if at all, in other kind of areas. So this is kind of an example of number to geography. We also see another number to geography with the 2Y routes, which serve places essentially outside of Wenatchee. Right, the 23, the 24, the 21, the 20, the 25, the 26, all go to places that are not Wenatchee. We might also notice a pattern, right, in the Y number, precisely in the kind of 2Y series routes. And the pattern is essentially this, right? 2 Y routes where the Y is even, generally serve places that are southwest and northeast of Wenatchee, and odd number routes serve places northwest and southeast. So there are definitely some exceptions to this rule, but we can see that, for example, in the southern portion, right, or the lower portion, where the 24 kind of goes in a more southeast or in a more southwest direction, and then the 23 goes in a more southeast direction. Whereas that is somewhat inversed in the kind of northern or top section of the map. We might also say that the 2Y routes are express routes. We don't necessarily know that because we don't know what's in the middle of those routes. But if we had some sort of further confirmation, we could state that the 2Y series are express routes. All right, so then we have our kind of second primary memorization technique, which is geography. So this is kind of using the visual, right? The visuals of transit very kind of directly to memorize the transit routes. So with geography, we have a few main points of memorization. First, transit hub connections. So transit hub connections are essentially it's very implicit, right? Routes congregate at transit hubs, and we want to memorize which routes congregate at which transit hubs, right? We also might want to know the order in which a route traverses the transit hubs. So if it goes to A, then B, then C, we want to know that. But usually that's kind of a game of connecting the dots because transit planners generally try to not design very convoluted or complicated routes. In this particular image on the right, we see two transit hubs, so the Vancouver Mall Transit Center and the Anderson Park and Ride. And we might try to memorize all the routes that go to the Vancouver Mall Transit Center or the Anderson Park and Ride, right? And so we also see, for example, the 32 in that image goes between Vancouver Mall Transit Center and Anderson Park and Ride. And we want to also memorize the order to better help us understand. Next, we have the distinction between coverage, local, and express routes. So coverage, let's first define these terms, right? So coverage route provides service to a low demand or poorly connected area. So usually this is something like a suburb or a very low density area where there are not a lot of people. Usually these types of routes are infrequent, and usually it's just to ensure there's some sort of transit or some sort of transit in that area. A local route serves moderate demand areas to even high demand areas. Usually it's on major arterials or major corridors or major kind of streets. Their goal is to balance speed and access. So they want to get you there quick, but they also want to get as many people on the bus as possible along that route. Their frequency generally ranges from rapid to maybe less frequent, for example, hourly or half hourly. But local routes are most of the routes that you'll see, right? And then express routes are kind of the same as above. So if you want to think of the difference, coverage routes go into very low density areas or kind of convoluted. Local routes kind of serve main roads, and express routes just go between A and B with a very little stopping in the middle. If we can understand what type of route a specific route is, we can understand the service it's supposed to provide. And this is important when we're trying to navigate, right? So if we want to go to a specific location, maybe somewhere far away, a coverage route might do that very well, right? Because it probably goes to that specific destination just to provide service to that region. But if we're trying to travel along a major corridor, it might not be helpful to wait around for a coverage bus, right? Because we know that coverage buses or coverage routes are very infrequent. And so we might want to prefer a local route or maybe an express route, right? Lastly, the idea of corridors. So individual routes are usually assigned to serve a specific set of corridors, primarily local and express routes. If we can understand the major transit corridors that are served, and especially if we can understand which routes serve which corridors, if we can also bring that together with the information on transit hubs, we can build up slowly a mental map of the service that is provided in a transit agency, right? Essentially, it helps us to memorize the system map and commit it to memory, right? And the advantage of that is when we're navigating, we don't have to rely on a map but have to read it and have to access it. We can just access it in our brain, right? On this particular map, we see a few different corridors. We see Van Mall Drive, served by a bunch of different routes. We see Anderson, served by routes like the 32. We see Northeast 25th Street, serviced by the 30. Maybe we could account Fourth Plane, right, serviced by that V, which is the Vine. It stands for the Vine. We can memorize all of those different types of corridors, right? And one final note is that we want to, these two memorization techniques are not mutually exclusive, right? It's better to use both the numbering and geography than just one alone, right? Just so you can have even a more comprehensive of a memorization. All right, so that will end this video, and I hope to see you back for the next video. Thank you.